sort of rerunning the previous session I was in, but which is much closer to Britain's first past the post system. There's no ideal in a democracy, but what do you want? Do you want something which is stable? Do you want something which is fair and transparent? Or do you want something which pays lip service to pleasing everybody and gets the opposite result?
Thank you. Amal, do you think we have ultra-democracy?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Haaretz for this conference, but I really don't want to be the talking Arab here. I think we should have more Arabs, Palestinian, Israelis that represent the future of Israel. And I really also think of myself as someone who represents the values of human rights, democracy, and justice. And if anyone from Israel and any place in the world that sees these values, then I represent him, or he or she can represent me. So I don't want to be here as representing a sector of a community back in Israel. And talking about democracy and talking about Jewish and democratic state, I just want you to step for a minute in my shoes and tell me what you see as someone who represents, or someone who is Palestinian Israeli living in one of the unrecognized villages in the Negev. And tell me if you don't see that conflict of this policy that driven by the state of Jewish people, where the land belonged to the Jewish people, where maximum Arabs and minimum land is the main policy and the main paradigm. Can't you see this as conflicting concepts? Well, it's very clear. And just to invite you to the protocols and the minutes of the Council for Israeli Security, you will read how they write about me. I am a security threat. I am a demographic threat. And I am not really a citizen. And even if you go into one of the streets in Herzliya Bituach or Tel Aviv, the mainstream 20 years old kid will say, אנחנו הישראלים והערבים בארץ. So I'm not an Israeli for that kid 20 years old. So if we talk about Israel, the focus is the Jewish majority and not the Palestinian Israeli minority. And if we talk about democracy, one of the major principles is minority rights. And if it's not about minority rights, then someone else give me another definition of democracy. And regarding to the progressive camp, I really, Stav, admire your work, but I think you are not sharp enough to present what is hamatzah of the progressive camp. I think the right wing are very clear in what they want, yet we are not very clear. We are so afraid to say who we are. We are so afraid not really to take the position, because we want to keep ourselves in this kind of dancing in between. Well, if we dance in between, definitely we will fail. And we have to be very sharp and give the people the right answer and the clear answer. If you live in such a situation in Israel, only if you talk clear, people will follow you. If you are not clear enough, people will follow the clearest person, even if he's not in their side of the map. And we really need to be very clear to be able to build this progressive camp.
Well, thanks for the challenge. I think that I agree that the litmus test for Israel's democracy is treating with full equality its Arab minority. For sure, that does not delegitimize the Zionist project of a Jewish state. It means that the Jewish state, while remaining a Jewish state, and then the question is in what respect, and there's an answer. You can, and again, there's a debate. I have my answer. It means that you control, for example, immigration law, and you have Chok HaShvut, and a Jewish public sphere, holidays. And that's, again, also a right of self-determination for the Jews. Ari spoke about the Balfour Declaration 99 years ago, and that's part of it. But the other part, and it's also part of our Declaration of Independence, is full equality to all our citizens. And are we doing a good enough job? No, we're not. This is the litmus test for whether our democracy is functioning. Another litmus test, and Melanie, I would like to address your point, and I absolutely agree that electoral reform is probably one of the most highly desirable goals that we should aspire and achieve. Now, as a former politician, I'll give two anecdotes that will demonstrate why is it so difficult. I was Secretary General of Israel's largest party. I can say I was Secretary General of next to nothing. Our party institutions are broken, dysfunctional institutions that at best regulate the competition on number 1, 2, and 3 within the party, and that's it. No discussion of platform, no role of growing leadership, of reaching out. All those goals and expectations that some overlay over the progressive camp or other camps, none of this will be achieved by our party institutions, and the Israeli people realize that. The trust in politicians and political parties is, and justifiably so, at an all-time low, and therefore electoral reform, and we can perhaps talk about later about the principle if the moderator will see it fit, is absolutely necessary. Is it possible? I think it is. If, for example, and I'll end with that, Stav's party would have entered the government, and I'm not advocating that, but in a context of a national unity government that would have occurred if they would have entered the government, when my party at the time at 2012 entered the government, the only redeeming feature of a national unity government is if it initiates electoral reform that will restore, hopefully over time, the trust in our politics as an arena that can actually address the real problems.
Let's try and take these ideas and try to examine an actual case. So just recently, Netanyahu said he will act to expel MK Hanin Zouabi for saying in the Knesset that Israeli soldiers are murderers. Do you think, and we'll start maybe with Stav, that someone who has Hanin Zouabi's opinions does not have any place in the Israeli Knesset? Obviously, she's not the only one in Israel who has these thoughts. Is that also your red line?
I have to tell you, I'll answer your question, and then I want to say something in continuation to what Yohana said. First of all, I completely disagree with Hanin Zouabi's opinions. It's very difficult for me to listen to her. But it's also very sad for me to see how she is used as an excuse for no policy making by this government. We saw yesterday an Israeli minister blaming Facebook for the current terrorism wave. We see how ministers and Knesset members from the right blaming different Arab Knesset members for the terrorism and so on. All of that is used as an excuse for no policy making. And that's what makes me sad. When I see her in parliament, it makes me furious.
But
and
should she be expelled?
The fact that she's elected, she doesn't need to be expelled by us Knesset members. It's not our role. It's the role of the Israeli public to decide who these Knesset members are going to be. It's not our role to decide which Knesset member we agree with and who we don't agree with. It's just not our role in Knesset. That's not how democracy works. When I see her speaking, so I move out of the assembly place of Knesset and I go to do my work. I go to focus on my job, not to listen to this incitement. But I will never vote on making Knesset members, of firing Knesset members. It's just not our role in parliament. But again, what I see again and again happening in our political system is how different things like Hanin Zouabi or like yesterday Facebook are being used as an excuse for not doing anything, for not taking action. Now, you talked about the need for stability. I know, is the Israeli politics not stable enough? We have the same prime minister for 10 years. That's a third of my lifetime. And he's still the prime minister. If he wanted to take action on any of the things that he promised his voters, being annexation, half of the ministers in parliament, half of the ministers in this government are pro-annexation, publicly. That's what they promised their voters before the election. Reality is, they don't take action. They will never annex the West Bank. They can do it. They have the majority for it in parliament. They will not do it because they know that it's a stupid idea. They know that it will be the end of the Zionist vision. They promised their voters so many things on security that they don't have the courage of taking, luckily, because what they promised would be a great risk for Israel. But they're not taking action on that. And that's the problem with our democracy. It's not that it's unstable, and it's not the framework. Yes, a political reform may be useful, but the problem is what happens with our political leaders. And what we don't see on either side is enough political courage. What we don't see, and that's again on either side, is political courage to take action, not just follow what happens on the polls, but to take action on the things that Israelis really need. You talked about equality in our education system. In this year, half of first graders in Israel are Arab or ultra-Orthodox. Half of them, that's non-Zionist, half from Israel. In 12 years' time, that's the age that's supposed to go to the army. They'll be 18. They'll be the taxpayers and supposed to be the class that's going to defend our security. It's half of them. Do they feel fully Israeli? Of course they don't. Both of these communities, they don't feel fully Israeli. Does anybody have a strategy for that? How are we going to take care of that? What happened to our politics doesn't need a political reform. It needs politicians who think about the long term, who doesn't just go into office to look for the next headline, to see what's their next Twitter post is going to be. It's about what's going to be with Israel in 20 years' time, how Israel is going to confront its biggest challenges, being its democracy, its economic challenges. Israel has reached this year a record, not a good record, first in poverty in the Western world and first in inequality. That's not Israel. It's not us, and we all know that. Million people marched on the street 5 years ago because they were begging to see the Israel that they were promised, the Israel of the Declaration of Independence, Israel of equality,